Joe Burrow missed an open practice. Panic ensued, and then we found out it was an off day. Let's break it down.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm Jake Lisco. He's James Rapine. We are your hosts on the Locked On Podcast Network. You can find Locked On Bengals on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcast. Shout out to the everydayers that make us an everyday part of their routine, and all of you out there who make us your first listen. Even in June, the diehard Bengals fans out there that don't want to miss a beat as we get to the quiet part of the offseason. We're not there yet, but it is coming. Today's episode is sponsored by GameTime, where you can save $20 off your first purchase of tickets with the promo code LOCKEDONNFL. Terms apply. And James, Joe Burrow missed practice on Tuesday. It was a surprise. Nobody knew where he was. They just knew that he wasn't out there. Well, I guess they knew. You knew. He was at Paycor Stadium, but he didn't practice. It was not necessarily expected. And well, Zac Taylor talked about it. He told the media what was going on after practice. You were there, but it was a bit of panic before that.
Plenty of panic. It felt like, at least I wasn't on Twitter as close as you were at the time because we were at practice, but apparently there was plenty of panic, patiently awaiting or nervously awaiting Zac Taylor's comments post-practice. And I got to be honest, as far as overall practice goes, I was checked out. I was focused on everything else but the football practice that was happening in front of me. Not that there wasn't some takeaways that we can get to, but before we do that, let's hear from Bengals head coach Zac Taylor and what he said to me and a bunch of other reporters after practice.
What's up?
So what's going on? Joe wasn't here today. What happened?
We've given Joe a day off every week. I didn't time this up great. I kind of thought you guys were here yesterday, so he threw yesterday, and so today's his day off.
What's been the approach for giving him a day off?
Just trying to be preventative. You know, for me, he's been feeling really good, and so when players usually communicate they're doing great, you know, you push them a little too hard. So just as the coach, we got to pull back from some of those guys that are in situations like that. So we've given him a day off every week. This is a day off this week.
Nothing he's asked for.
No. If you ask him, he's going to be out here every day, and that's part of the problem, you know, is defending the player from himself.
So is this part of the growth that maybe he's wanting to show, like kind of figuring out where his body's at? Is this maybe part of that?
He's been great. Like anytime you ask for feedback from him, things are always going really well. And so I've just learned, having dealing with these players for a long time now, that you got to defend them from themselves sometimes. So if things are going good, that's good. Let's be smart, you know, and limit your time. So, you know, last week we've really never gone more than 2 days in a row. We had 3 days this week we're practicing, so we just gave him the middle day off.
Expectations for him to compete next week, I imagine?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
All 3 days.
That's to be determined. I haven't really – there's some flexibility maybe with one of the minicamp days in terms of what we're actually going to do. So I don't want to put my foot in my mouth there on how that's all going to work out.
When y'all built the plan out, when did you guys decide, okay, we're going to go ahead and mandate a rest day?
Pretty fluid. You know, like during phase 2 when we're out here throwing, you get more throws during the OTA days because we're doing 7-on-7, so there's a lot of reps there. So really, we made that adjustment as we got into week 1 and counted the number of throws we're doing. Again, we're not monitoring his reps in practice. We're trying to be proactive with the day in totality, and so that's just a decision we made.
When did you make the call that would be today? Was that
Well,
part of the off-season program?
Yeah, it's been the second day off every week mainly. And so, again, we haven't really had consistent days this week, so I was just assuming you guys would be here yesterday and we'd get all the tape you guys want, and then lo and behold, you aren't here yesterday. And that's my fault, nobody else's. And so we gave him today off.
Is there an appointment, whether it be with his surgeon or with the trainers, that is upcoming, whether it be before training camp, that it's like the final check mark?
Yeah, I won't get into all that, but everything's been positive with those conversations we've had with his doctor.
Why is it important that you give him a day off every week?
Again, you just got to – sometimes the players will push themselves because they're pro athletes, and that's their mindset, and that's what makes Joe so great. And so it's my job as a head coach to make some decisions to be helpful to him.
How receptive was he when you kind of when y'all?
He's to a good point. When he knows I'm saying something, he knows I mean it. And sometimes he knows when it's up to discussion, and sometimes it's not. And so I think he knows we're doing the right thing.
How important is that relationship with your quarterback and the head coach to be able to have that level of dialogue and have that trust that when you say something?
I can only speak here. I can't speak for other teams. It's critical here. You know, our quarterback is is a big reason why things happen here. And so I think the communication between he and I has got to be critical. And, I think it's been that way so far. It's been positive.
Joe does a lot away from the field to get ready and in the classroom. Is he doing that on days where he's not throwing?
Yeah, he is. He's in there with Nick Cosgray. And, again, I won't get on all the prehab stuff he does, but he does a good job making sure he's right.
Coach, you got rankings.
I'll get you, Herman.
The other practices that he's not been out. Well, has he been out here for those even though he hasn't?
It's hit or miss. Sometimes just depend on the day. Yeah.
Just depend on rehab.
Yeah. What do you got, Jeff?
I was going to say you got Rankins back.
Yeah, it's good. Sheldon came. He's been back since yesterday, so it's been good to get him out here and get him acclimated with how we do everything. And so, again, he's a pro, so he's been doing a great job away from the facility, and now it's good to get him back in here for this last couple of weeks.
I mean, he's a guy that seems like he's been through this 10 times before. And he's kind of seems to be a guy that studies and knows the guys that he's playing.
Yep. There's a reason you sign guys like him. He's a pro. He knows how to get himself right, and so we're happy to have him here and get him acclimated with our team.
So just to clarify, there's no setbacks, and is he going to practice tomorrow?
Yes.
Your thoughts, Zach, on Justin Jefferson getting extended? He's one of the superstars in this league, big offensive player, and you've got one coming up.
It's a good time to be a receiver.
Have you communicated with Jamar if he will be here for mandatory? Is that something that's come up like you?
I've talked with Jamar. I won't get into our conversations, but we've had great dialogue.
Zach, what have you noticed about Mike Gesicki, just watching him? I know it's just off-season workouts, but already how he goes about his business.
Really impressed. I think when you see him in person, running routes and doing all the things, you don't know a person, you don't know their football IQ, you don't know all that stuff till you get them. Mike has been really impressive, for the several weeks he's been here.
Obviously, quite a bit there that we will dive into outside of just the Joe Burrow topic. But on the topic of Joe Burrow, a planned off day, they haven't had him throwing, according to Taylor, at least very often, 2 days in a row. This is something that has been evolving through the offseason program as they've ramped up. And he's talked about phase 2 and the OTAs as a period where they started to institute these rest days, James. But certainly seemed to be in a good mood. All the social media stuff I saw, players seem to be in a good mood. Coaches seem to be in a good mood at this practice. Certainly nothing that indicated there was a somber or fearful attitude around Joe Burrow's wrists. And everything points to this being exactly as Zac Taylor said, a routine planned off day for Burrow.
Yeah, makes sense. Next time, Zach will have it noted. Hopefully there isn't a next time, but don't do it when the media is there. Because it's not like we meant to create any panic, but Burrow wasn't out there, and that's noteworthy. And so that weird in between is certainly it's one of those things where we're all searching for answers and wondering, and you just don't know because we don't know. The good news is Kelsey is the one who's pretty direct about it. Zach said that Joe will practice on Wednesday. So if you're listening to this on Wednesday, Joe Burrow's set to practice on Wednesday. I will say it now. I told you Joe Burrow's in the building. I'm one of the few that probably saw Joe Burrow in the building today. Maybe the only media member that saw Joe Burrow in the building today. And so, yeah, he didn't have anything on his wrist when I saw him. Might have changed. Who knows? He might have been going to a therapy session. I have no idea. Didn't say anything to him. Definitely saw him. He was present. He was there. It was business as usual. He just wasn't in uniform going out to practice. From that perspective of him being in the building, it's not like he was anywhere else. So that part is good. As far as everything else Zach said about Joe Burrow, well, I think that's what we should get to next, Jake, is reacting to the rehab, the plan, some of Zac Taylor's other comments when it comes to number 9. So we'll do that coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by GameTime. GameTime is the place you need to go for all of your tickets for any live event you can think of, whether it's a Reds game when they're back in town, whether it's the NBA Finals, if you're going to try to catch them in Boston or maybe in Dallas, or maybe it's that concert that you've been thinking about. Should you go? Should you not go? Obviously, there's a ton of summer concerts here in Cincinnati. You should go, and you should go with GameTime because GameTime is going to find the last-minute deal that you need. They're going to give you all-in prices so there's no guesswork, wondering what that ticket is going to cost you. You get views from your seat, which means you know exactly what you're getting with what ticket you're looking for, what view you're looking for. You can find all of it with GameTime. So check out GameTime today by downloading the GameTime app, creating an account, and using code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
So what did we learn about the Joe Burrow rest plan this offseason? We learned that Joe Burrow's been getting a day off a week. We were not very aware of that or didn't have it concretely known until Zac Taylor said so. This has been something that was observed by observers on the bridge, let's say. And if you're a Joe Goodberry subscriber, you would have seen that on Thursday last week and then by the media today. I think it's hilarious that Zac Taylor was like, yeah, I thought you guys were here yesterday. Whoops. I made a mistake, and now we have mass panic for an hour and a half until I get to talk to you guys. Communication issue that could have been avoided, but nonetheless, a protecting the player from himself kind of thing, to use Zac Taylor's words. Joe Burrow would be out there if he could. It's not what some speculated, that Burrow is holding himself out of practice, something that we've talked about, I've talked about at least, as a point of maturity for Burrow, and something that Burrow himself talked about. I think the last time we heard from him was that he would be maybe a little bit less aggressive in pushing himself. And maybe that's some of the periods where you observed, James, within a practice that he did participate in, where he held himself out, perhaps. Unclear as to whether or not that's Burrow or a collaborative plan between him and the coaches, but he's obviously on board. Taylor talked about that bit of the communication process as well between himself and the training staff and coaching staff and Joe Burrow. But I did think it was interesting to hear that part of it, to hear that this has been an ongoing plan and the rationale behind it.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And listening to that again, obviously I was there in person, but just listening to that and watching that, it's pretty darn noteworthy. It's pretty noteworthy because it's like, oh yeah, he'd be out here. It's like, well, it's freaking June. And you know what? I totally get it, because if I'm Burrow, I'd want to be out there. I'd want to be doing it because that's what you do. And I get it. There's a sense of like maturing where you don't have to put yourself in all of those things. But like the Brady's, the Manning, like these dudes are just kind of wired that way sometimes. Brady didn't like to take any reps off. He wanted to play in every preseason game. And I know Burrow's had more injuries and all of those things. And like, I get it. I also think that maybe it is as simple as the coaching staff, the medical staff being like, hey, no, Joe, no, not today. And it sounds like this is something they established weeks ago. It's not something that, they were questioning going into this offseason program. It was the plan they had in place. But still, I think that it's, you want to talk about like maturity from a Burrow standpoint. I don't think in 2021, Zac Taylor's telling Joe Burrow no at all, even in OTAs. I don't think he is. And so I do think that's a good thing, and it's a good sign, because there needs to be someone that is like, no, if it comes to that. And obviously this is a much potentially smaller thing and more of a plan than anything, but it is good in that way as well. But it is noteworthy because maybe Joe Burrow is just never going to be that guy. And he's always going to be someone that's trying to push through. And by the way, in the middle of the season, that's what I need him to do. But it's not the middle of the season. It's June 4th as we record this.
It's also a learning process for Joe Burrow, and it will probably continue to be a collaboration between him and the medical staff and the coaching staff as he continues to learn about these boundaries, if it's something that he dedicates himself to and something that he wants to continue to work on, as he indicated he did. But the improved or continued relationship building between Zac Taylor and his quarterback, who Taylor obviously points out is a big reason for a lot of the success that the Bengals have had, is important to the success of the football team. And translating that to training camp for the sore days where it's like, nah, Joe, we need you to take a day off today here early in training camp, or in early June, or in late May, or whenever the off day is. is, to your point, James, even if it's not directly Joe Burrow standing up and learning those lessons and having that all figured out yet. And I do think that perhaps this is an indication that that will take time for Burrow. If as Zac Taylor said, he will be out there every day and pushing through any soreness, or maybe he just doesn't have soreness. And that's kind of it. And he's just like, well, of course I should be out there because I feel fine. And it could be as simple as that too. And they're just doing this out of an abundance of caution. But having that development from the coaching staff and that lesson learned from the coaching staff is just as useful as Joe Burrow having that lesson learned. Because if the coaching staff had that lesson learned last year when the calf is tight, they do more than just adjust the practice plan. They pull him out of certain portions of the practice or just shut him down that day altogether before you have the calf injury occur, perhaps. Or at least there's a better chance of that happening.
Yep, no doubt. And so that's the other angle of it too. And having that perspective, because a rest day could have been the difference there in setting the tone for the entire season. And so having these rest days, not a big deal. I would expect to see them. We may see them in training camp. Who knows? Really, I mean, who knows? Does Joe Burrow need every, a full week's worth of training camp reps, or can he go with 2 days on, 1 day off, 2 days on? I doubt it. I doubt he does that in camp. Just so you know, I'd be surprised, but it wouldn't shock me, and I wouldn't be mad at it if they did do that, especially early in camp. But you're right. Maybe his wrist is perfect. Hopefully we'll hear from Joe at the end of the offseason program. Maybe his wrist is feeling fine, and he's like, hey, man, let's get these reps in. At the same time, we know he's lifting. We know he's in shape. We know he's throwing. He's doing everything. So little by little, that's fine with me. Play it safe. We want a training camp full of Joe Burrow, and certainly a week one healthy Joe Burrow is what we're hoping to see.
We'll have a chance to see him one more time this offseason, or you will have a chance to see him more accurately, James, during mini camp next week, 2 days. At least I would forecast, judging from Zac Taylor's comments, at least a couple of days of mandatory mini camp next week. It sounds like that third day is there if they need it, let's say, judging from what Zac Taylor had to say about it. Would you agree?
Yeah, I think there's a decent chance that you and I could easily make it through that third day.
If they were to have the third day?
Yeah, and I think there's a chance they have it. And it's just, it's last day of school vibes, so to speak.
Yeah. Maybe they give Evan McPherson a 57-yard field goal attempt at the end of practice too. You know, how if you make this shot, you don't have to practice tomorrow kind of thing.
They give Joe Burrow a 65-yard throw to Jamar because it's mandatory. You guys have to hit this with Dax in coverage and Geno over the top.
Just
you guys have to hit this, or we're going to practice tomorrow.
We're going to practice.
I bet they'd hit it. I bet they'd hit it.
Speaking of Jamar Chase,
that
was a question that was asked to Zac Taylor about his planned presence for mandatory minicamp next week. Sheldon Rankins was also back in town. We'll talk about the absences and the rest of what Zac Taylor had to say and other practice observations, if any, to finish up the show coming up next. Today's episode is sponsored by BetterHelp. Sometimes we need the opportunity to get something off our chest, whether it's big or small. Certain things can really start to get to you, and it's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased on your life. I want to say how I really feel about something. I feel like there's this need for instant news, and when Joe Burrow's not out there for the beginning of practice, we just need to reserve judgment, as I said on Twitter when this happened, and wait and see what happens. And lo and behold, it was a rest day. You might be thinking about something more serious than that. Maybe it's more than sports. And BetterHelp is a great way to work through those topics with an unbiased professional therapist on your schedule, easy to use online. And it's great because it can fit anybody. We know, and they know at BetterHelp, that therapy is different for everyone. And they know that you're going to have bigger problems than the Bengals not articulating well that Joe Burrow had a planned off day. And if you need to get something off your chest, BetterHelp is a great place to do it. It's entirely online, like I said, designed to be flexible, suited to your schedule, and you can get 10% off your first month right now at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
It's good to be a wide receiver, Jake. Zac Taylor was asked about Justin Jefferson, and it is good to be a receiver, especially if you're Jamar Chase. I think there is zero thought about Jamar not being there, even though he was in town over the weekend, not there now for the voluntary workouts. I expect to see him next week during the mandatory mini camp, which, like you said, could just be a couple of days. We'll see. Scheduled for 3 days. But is there anything more to say about Jamar Chase as far as his absence is concerned, especially if you know Joe Burrow isn't practicing today? If I'm Jamar, I'm probably not showing up either.
Yeah, I mean, we talked before the show about Lamar Jackson missing an OTA practice for the Ravens. You look at the Patriots list of absences on Tuesday, it's like 13 players, including Matt Judon and Mike Nwanu, two of their top paid players. It's not uncommon, is the point here, for players in general to miss OTA practices. Maybe you're thinking about Trent Brown. Maybe you're thinking about Sheldon Rankins before this week. Maybe you're thinking about Jamar Chase. And it's not uncommon for even star players to miss some of the voluntary part or all of the voluntary part of the offseason. And while it would certainly be ideal, and I'll reiterate this point, it would be preferable for Joe Burrow to get all the reps and to not be coming off an injury. It would be preferable for Jamar Chase to be there, for T. Higgins to be present and to have signed his franchise tag and to be going through all these reps. That would indisputably be better. It's not a huge deal if guys aren't there, I think is the bottom line. It's not going to make or break your season because a guy that's very familiar with your system, and in particular, thinking about Jamar Chase, has one of the best quarterback wide receiver relationships in the league's history, to miss a little bit of the offseason program.
Exactly. I mean, that's where I'm at, and not concerned. Expect to see him next week. Don't expect to see T. Expect to see Trent Brown next week. Didn't see him. We did see Sheldon Rankins, and he made his return and talked to him in the locker room a little bit. He said he did want to get a little more familiar with the system, had been looking at the playbook and is familiar with that, but just getting involved as one of the new guys. And he hadn't been here for any of the offseason program. Trent Brown has, just so you know, for those just joining us or listening and keeping track. So it's good to see Rankins. Obviously, they're going to ask a ton out of Rankins. And the one thing I took away from talking with him, he is ready and willing to embrace Chris Jenkins, willing and ready to embrace McKinley Jackson and get the most out of them, help them grow, give them advice, all of those things. Said Nick Fairley was someone that helped him. Remember Nick Fairley? He was the top pick from the Detroit Lions in 2011. I remember once upon a time, there were people in this town that wanted the Bengals to take him over A.J. Green. Thank God they didn't. But Nick Fairley was a mentor in New Orleans to Sheldon Rankins, as was obviously Cam Jordan, who's the big one and the one that everyone certainly remembers because he's a star. But Rankins willing to embrace, mentor these rookies, which, man, sign me up. Chris Jenkins and Sheldon Rankins working together, that mindset that Rankins has is certainly going to help with Chris Jenkins.
And there's some rhyming names, sort of. The Kins kin. That doesn't quite roll
Jenkins
off
and Rankins.
Well, they both end in K-I-N-S is all.
Yeah. No, I get it.
And I was trying to do like a brothers thing with kin.
I
I don't think it's going to stick.
Same positions too. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's going to be a shirt made of that. I got to be honest with you.
Yeah, that would be a weird one, I think. Nonetheless, good to see Sheldon Rankins at practice. Good to see him embracing that role. I think a leadership role in the defensive interior is sort of needed. Not that BJ Hill can't be a leader in that room as the now longest tenured veteran on the interior defensive line in Cincinnati. I want to make sure I have that right. I believe that is correct. the rest of the players outside of Rankins on rookie deals on the defensive interior, correct? Right?
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right.
Or were waiver claims. So getting Rankins to step into that role willingly, as you would kind of expect, judging from the first impressions of his personality in his first meeting with the media after he signed with the Bengals, is a welcome sight. And just having the player getting into some practices before it's absolutely mandatory is also nice. Like I said, it's not the end of the world if these guys aren't there, but it's nice to see for the players that are new to the team. And you mentioned Trent Brown was a participant earlier in the OTA program, or in the offseason program, not before OTAs. Getting some measure of participation from these guys that are unfamiliar and new to the team is obviously welcome and better than not getting that participation. So nice to have Rankins present. Yeah. I guess we'll wrap with, I know you said that the focus was very much on Joe Burrow's absence after that was noted at the beginning of practice, but was there anything else that you noticed in practice that you wanted to share before we get out of here?
Yeah, they should all be called OTAs, and I'm sick and tired of saying off-season program because some are just workouts and some aren't. It should all be OTAs. They're all OTAs until minicamp. That's it. Organized team activities. You know how many things they could watch a movie and it's an OTA. Everything falls under OTA. So it really doesn't matter. Like Joe Burrow was at OTAs today because it was an organized team activity. He was just in the locker room for it. You see how silly it is? They should all be called OTAs. So there you go. No, not really. The Burrow news kind of stuck with us some. I will say, Dax, Jordan, the rotation we talked about with the group 1 versus group 2, they're still getting their reps. Obviously, Dax is battling with DJ Turner for that starting corner job. Jordan Battle going to try to battle with Von Bell for that starting safety job. 2 battles that will continue. Amarius Mims getting valuable reps still at right tackle. And that's about it. Really good to see Sheldon Rankins there, though, because, again, the mentorship element, I think, is going to be a factor because you're banking on him to kind of help lead this new wave of Bengals defensive tackles.
I'm going to just shout out Trags for a second here as we wrap up. You mentioned Amarius Mims continuing to get a lot of work with the first team, and Trags has a video of a drill that Mims is going through where if you turn it up, you can actually hear the coaching points that Frank Pollock is working with Amarius Mims on it. It's not every day that you actually see one of these videos and you can hear the coach and actually get a clear understanding of the coaching points that they're working on. Even when we're there in person, like going back to last year in training camp, it's pretty loud, and maybe it's easier during OTAs, but it's pretty loud between music and the generators and all this and fans out there. It's pretty tough to actually hear what is being said on the field. And so it's pretty cool in that one video at Trags, Mike Petralia put out there. You can hear the coaching points. So shout out to that one if you want to go check that video out. He has that up on Twitter. But we'll have some more practice takeaways next week. We've got 1 episode left this week. If you missed yesterday, should have said this at the top of the show as well, but we'll only have 1 more episode this week as we're getting into our off-season schedule here. We'll circle back to those biggest questions. We did the offense earlier this week. We'll get to the defensive side of the ball to finish up the week, unless there's other breaking news. And if something else big happens that we need to react to and break down, we'll make sure we do that. And of course, if that happens on a regularly scheduled off day and it's a big enough story, we will emerge and do what we have to do to get you the analysis that you are looking for from Locked On Bengals. But until then, that's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.